Thank you so much for inviting me here, and it's really a pleasure. And we will all say, of course, the pleasure would have been much bigger if we would have be together in one room, but we can do it this way because then we can get more people there, and it saves us traveling time, etc. But personally, I always like being in the same room with people to have a more direct conversation. But this works fine as well, and I hope you will enjoy the presentation. I apologize that I'm not able to do it in Danish. I speak a little bit of Swedish, but not enough to give a presentation. Also, I can try to speak a bit more back in the flow to make it sound like a bit more Danish, but this is probably not going to work. So I better not do it, I think. I always enjoy watching Scandinavian crime series, so the sound is familiar to me, but I'm not able to speak it. So I'll do it in English if you permit me. And so I'll now share my screen so that you can see the presentation that I prepared. And I will have to put it on presentation mode. That is here. Yes. And if everything works fine, now you should have one slide.
We can see your slide now, Mark.
Right, yes. And you can see that I changed a little bit in the title. The title was Conceptual Teaching for Technological Literacy. I always like conceptual learning because learning is what we do it for in the end, of course. So, I mean, this is not meant to be a correction, but it's just that my focus will be on how we can teach in such a way that pupils really learn for technological literacy, because that is the idea. How can we help a next generation grow up that is technologically literate? And I guess it's obvious for all that this is very important because we live in a technological society. So being technological literate is very important for everyone who lives in that society. A brief summary of what we're going to do. First, let's talk a little bit about what technological literacy is. And then generally people recognize that there are three elements in it. It is knowledge that makes you technologically literate. You know certain things, you know what a computer is, and you know what mobile phones are, etc. But you also have skills to operate them, and you have attitudes. And attitudes is not just I think this, I think that, but you would like to have attitudes, of course, that have some kind of basis in the knowledge and the skills. It's not just what you think of it, but it is somehow grounded in in knowledge and skills. But still, you have an attitude. You like it or you like it not. You recognize its importance or you don't, or etc. These are all elements in attitudes. I will focus a bit on the knowledge. And then what I would like to emphasize is that knowledge for technological literacy should preferably not just be ad hoc. Of course, you can put a lot of detailed knowledge in a curriculum, like how exactly the computer works, what kind of components does it have, and all those kind of nitty-gritty. But I'm convinced that it's much more important to recognize more deeper concepts of technology. For instance, that a computer is a system and that it has different parts that work together, and only then the computer does what it does, because that is a concept that you can recognize in many other devices as well, because the washing machine is also a computer, and your coffee machine is also a computer, and it's also a system, and even traffic is a system, and many other things are systems. So deeper knowledge, more at conceptual level than all these nuts and bolts knowledge. What I'm also going to plea for is to take the designer stance to help understand what technology is. Now that, of course, is one-sided, because technological literacy is perhaps even primarily is the ability to live in a technological society, not necessarily as someone that contributes to technology as an engineer, but someone who lives in that society and is able to operate properly with all these things around you, also to do it in a responsible way, a sustainable way. So not just being able to let the computer work, but also think about what is proper use, what is improper use. Even morally proper and improper, that also is part of it, as far as I'm concerned. But when we take the designer stance, we also see the other side, the development side, and these are closely connected, because nowadays we know that designers absolutely must try to live in the mind of the user in order to be able to get a good product. And so when we do design work with pupils, it helps them both to see the development phase in technology and thus understand that technology is all about decision making, because one of the first misunderstandings in technological literacy is that technology is there as it is. It is a given, so the only thing you can do is just use it as it is, while in fact technology is a continuous process of decision making with all sorts of values involved, with moral values, aesthetic values, economic values, etc., etc. So this decision making process is very important for technological literacy, and you get to see it immediately when you take the designer stance, because then all of a sudden you have to make those decisions yourself and understand how difficult they can be, what kind of dilemmas you can face, etc. So the designer stance, I think, is a legitimate stance to take if you want to stimulate technological literacy. So I will talk primarily about design activities to enhance conceptual understanding. So what I will do is first talk a bit about conceptual understanding, how we thought about that in the past, how presently we think about conceptual understanding and how to develop it. And then I will narrow down to how to use design activities to enhance conceptual understanding. Now, so I've talked a little bit already about the importance of concept learning. These concepts, like the concept of systems, to mention just that example again, they are stable over time. If you have a curriculum that is very much based on very concrete technologies, it will be outdated very quickly, because these technologies change in a very high speed, and so your curriculum will very quickly be outdated. But the concepts, the deeper concepts, they will remain stable over time, because systems have been there all the time. Whatever device you take from the past, it was a system, and whatever complex device you take for the future, it will also have a systems character. So this is a concept that remains stable. And the concepts also show more of the nature of the subject. If you look at the washing machine as a system, you suddenly start to understand it at a deeper level than just it is a heap of metals and nuts and bolts and all those kind of things. You see more properly what kind of thing it really is. And also concept knowledge bridges the gap between general and vocational education, because it helps you both get a general understanding, but also it helps you to deal with these devices in a more sophisticated way, because you understand their nature, so you're better able to work with them. And well, I don't know, I think you have the same problems more or less in Denmark, but in the Netherlands we are faced with a sort of a gap between general education that is more cognitively oriented, you might say, and the more practically oriented vocational education. And concept understanding is important for both, and in fact these are the same concepts that should be understood in both. So this also helps break down these barriers between general and vocational education. Now, first, let us focus on the concept of technology itself before we go into the idea of concepts within technology. So a system, the systems, is a concept that we use within technology, but technology itself is also something you need to understand in order to be technologically literate. What is this thing called technology? Now, here I would like to call in the philosophy of technology, in which I'm also involved for one day a week. And there's a rather famous or classic book written by Carl Mitchum, who is an American philosopher of technology, and it's called Thinking Through Technology. It's very, very nice survey of the different kind of topics that have been covered in the philosophy of technology so far. And what he does is divide them into 4 areas, and they are all related to a specific subdomain of philosophy. And these are these 4 domains. It is all 4 are ways of talking about technology, or ways of conceptualizing technology. Now, the first is one that appeals immediately to pupils. If you ask pupils what technology is, they will start listing devices. They will say, technology, oh, that is computers, lasers, robots, mobile phones, etc. So that is immediately what comes to mind when they say that is technology. And that is correct, because technology indeed is all these artifacts around us that we see, that we use, that we sometimes annoy us, etc. And if we reflect on the nature of artifacts, then in fact we are in the philosophical area of ontology. So we try to understand what they are by looking at in what way do they exist. Well, one of the main outcomes in the philosophy of technology is that important in their existence is that they do not only have a physical nature, like a rock that is lying somewhere in the wood, but it also has a functional nature. Someone uses it for a purpose. Someone ascribes a function to it. Functional the functional nature is completely a matter of ascription. So the stone in the wood doesn't have a function until someone sees it and thinks, hey, it has a nice appearance. I could take it with me, put it on a shelf, and then it can serve as a sort of aesthetic thing. And then it, in a way, has also it also got a functional nature, because now suddenly it is a device that I use for something. But originally it only had a physical nature. So artifacts, technical artifacts, are those things that have both a physical nature that is intrinsic, because all the properties related to that are intrinsic for the artifact. The stone's weight and its color and its size and its material properties, these are all intrinsic. They're not a matter of ascription. They're intrinsic. Of course, I need to weigh the stone in order to get to know its weight, but the weight itself is not a matter of ascription. The stone has a certain weight, irrespective of what I think of it. But all the functional characteristics are all a matter of ascription, what I use the stone for. I can also use it maybe as a football. When boys are in the wood and they look for something that they can kick around, they can use the stone as a football. But I can also use it as an artifact for its beauty, etc. So that's what we say about artifacts. So technology as artifacts, very close to the heart of pupils. Unfortunately, it sometimes is the only aspect that they can mention, because the other three are very often not in their minds. And so technology education has a challenge of bringing these other three also in their minds. Well, what are these other things? The second area is technology as a knowledge domain. Technology as something that you can study. Now, this is very, very new for many people. So that technology is a knowledge domain. For science, they know, because you have all these laws, Newton's law, Gay-Lussac's law, Boyle's law, whose ever law. But technology also has its laws, or knowledge at least, is something that is very new to them. And that brings us into the area of epistemology, philosophically seen. And one of the main outcomes of philosophy of technology in that domain is that, contrary to science, technological knowledge has a normative dimension. There is normativity within the knowledge. So sometimes knowledge is about norms. Now, that is not the case in science, because in natural sciences, you don't talk about how nature should be, you only talk about how it is. So you look at the behavior of a certain particle, and if it matches the behavior of electrons, then you will say, okay, this particle is an electron. But if it doesn't, you're not going to complain that this electron is broke or is malfunctioning or whatever. No, it's just not an electron. So natural sciences do not have an opinion on reality. They just describe it as it is. So all the knowledge is purely descriptive, but technological knowledge is often normative. Think of functional knowledge. If I say I know that the function of this car is to bring me from A to B, then that knowledge holds even though the car at that moment is in the garage, and it cannot even bring me from A to B, because knowledge of functions is normative knowledge, not a descriptive knowledge. It doesn't describe what the car actually does. It describes what the car ought to do in order to be a car. The same, by the way, for knowledge of standards. So when I say I know that the size of a sheet of A4 paper is so many by so many millimeters, that is not descriptive, it is prescriptive or normative, because actually what I'm saying is, in order to be called an A4 sheet, the sizes of these papers should be so many by so many millimeters. So there you can also see, by the way, that this knowledge is not always the outcome of an experiment, but it can also be the outcome of just an agreement, which is also impossible in science. We cannot say, well, let's today define the mass of the electron as so many kilograms. That's nonsense. So in physics, everything should be the outcome of an experiment. Third, technology is about doing things. Doing what? Well, designing, making, and using / assessing. Well, that quickly comes into mind of pupils, of course, when you ask them more deeply about what they think. So this is not completely new, but also their philosophy of technology has been engaged in thinking about this. And maybe if I can just mention one thing, for designing, in education, you many times see all these wonderful flowcharts, sometimes circles, sometimes lines, about how design processes go about. So you first start with this, then you do that, then you do that, and perhaps you can close the circle and say, I start all over again. But in philosophy of technology, we've said, be careful with these models, because that's what they are. They are not real descriptions of how design goes. They are a sort of idealized and generalized description of how design might be done. But when you do a concrete design work, you always have to make certain adaptations to it because of the specific context in which you do the design work. So we use it very often in education. You can see these flowcharts all around the place, but all of them are just generalizations. They have a model character. They don't describe the full reality in its full complexity, but they are simplified versions of reality. So as soon as you engage in a real design process, you have to take them with some, with a grain of salt. And so be careful not to apply them too strictly. Then we have a very important area that is, well, if you call it up, you can also bring it into people's minds. It has to do with technology as a value-related thing. It is something that is very much in our nature. We are human technologic, as you might say. And so we develop technologies based on all sorts of values. Values about what is good life, values about what is also morally good life, what we think is beautiful. So there's areas like ethics, aesthetics, metaphysics even. What do you think reality consists about? All those kind of things are involved in the values. But it is related to worldviews. And the philosophical domain that deals with it is axiology. And so this is also an important area because we've become more and more aware how important that is, both in the development and in the appreciation of technology, because technology is so very, very influential on our lives, on society as a whole, but also on us as individuals, that we're almost forced to think about these values. So when you see the whole domain of robotics coming up, we see robots all around us. Some of them start looking like us more and more, and these robots do something with us. If you look at robot Sophia, very famous robot because she looks very much like humans. She has facial expressions. She can survive an interview, even with BBC. There's a very nice example on the internet, on YouTube. But we get nervous of it. You can see one of these people interviewing her that she gets very nervous. Like, is this a machine or is it a human? How should I see that thing? Is it a thing still, or is it more than it? Is it almost human? So how should I see it? Is it morally correct to make machines that look so much like us? So there's all sorts of feelings that we get that are related to moral concerns that we have. So we're almost forced nowadays to think about moral issues of technology. So these four together give a balanced view of the concept of technology as a whole, of what technology is in general. That is, I think, the basis for all technological literacy. So if one of these four is absent in your mental conception of technology, it is handicapped. You are not aware of the full meaning of the word technology. So this is the very basis. This is if you check any curriculum for technology education, you should really be able to find elements of all four. And if not, there's all reason to revise the curriculum because all of these should be there somehow. And of course, you're not going to deal with in practice one by one. No, you do all sorts of projects. You do nice things with pupils. You design things. You make things, etc. But by doing it, you have to build on a general image, a conceptual image of what technology is, in which these four components somehow are present. So that's the first step. It's technology as a whole. Now, then also about learning specific concepts like systems, like models is also an important concept. I'll mention some more later on, but how do your pupils learn that? Well, let's first say there is certainly a hurdle to be taken because concepts by nature are abstract. So a washing machine is not a concept, a system is. And so what we have to do is help pupils make the step from washing machine to system. Now that's quite a hurdle because pupils can think concretely, but to think in more abstract ways is really a challenge for them. So we have to help them. Now, originally we thought that this was very simple. We just teach them the abstract level. We give them a definition of what a system is. A system is a complex whole of different parts that work together to fulfill an overall function, etc. And then we start giving examples to apply this general definition to specific examples. We now know from a lot of educational research doesn't work. Pupils never get to understand the systems concept that way because this general definition flies away immediately, one ear in, the other ear out. It doesn't really help. So next step was that we said Well, let's start with the washing machine. And so we talk a bit about the washing machine, and we show that all these different parts work together and together make sure that the wash gets washed. And then we say, okay, but this is an example of a system, and a system is a complex part of different objects that all work together, etc. And then we say, well, okay, now you apply this to the car. And then pupils again sit flabbergasted. What do you mean? A car is totally different from a washing machine. What do you want me to do? So this is not enough either. So this idea from concrete, abstract, and then application to a next example at the concrete level doesn't work either. We also know that by educational research. What nowadays we think is that you have to take this one particular concept, like the systems concept, and then work your way through a number of different concrete situations that are different. So you take the washing machine, you take the car, you take the house, you take the airfield, you take the aircraft maybe, or whatever you take, but also take situations that have non-material elements in. And then each time you say washing machine, you see that different parts work together. You see the car, you see each different parts work together. You see the airport, different parts, buildings, people, etc., and they work together for an overall purpose. And so then by and large, pupils will say, wait a minute, now I understand what you're doing. You're showing me each time there is different parts working together, and that is what you call a system. And then, yes, we say, now we have reached what we wanted, because now they get a deeper understanding, and then it is not problematic anymore to take them to the next example and see, do you recognize this as a system too? Can you describe it? Does it give you an understanding? So that's the way we believe it should be done. Now in the Netherlands, we call it the concept context approach, which means that you take one and the same concept, teach it in different contexts, and then by doing that, gradually a deeper and wider concept of technology, mental concept of technology, grows in the pupils' minds. So that's the idea. And we're still doing research to investigate the effect of that. And so that is the way we work in educational research now. Now, I promised to mention some of these examples of concepts. These are the examples that I had in mind. This is the result of a Delphi study that I did myself, together with a master student and a colleague in the United States, or two colleagues in the United States. And this is not exhaustive, I think, but these are concepts that a group of experts in technology education, in the philosophy of technology, and in engineering education together brought up as the basic concepts in technology and engineering. So it's designing as a process, which includes sub-concepts like optimizing, trade-off, customer requirements. The concept of systems that I mentioned, with sub-concepts like artifact, function, structure. Modeling, including sub-concepts like abstraction, idealization, simulation. Resources, including sub-concepts matter, energy, information, and values as a concept, including such things as sustainability, safety, risk, and privacy. And if you want to have it another way, there is also, I'll skip one I had here. There's also one that is at the moment being used to put together a new Dutch curriculum, but in fact it was derived from the next generation of science standards in the United States. Put together by the by the American Association of Advancement of Science. And there you have, that's even more interesting, there is umbrella concepts that are also valid in science and in mathematics. And that is things like patterns, scale and ratio, cause and effect. Here you have your systems again, conservation, structure and function, stability and change, sustainability, and safety and risk. So these are umbrella concepts that are not only applicable in technology, but also in science and in mathematics. Coming back to the STEM perspective then, because that is what very interesting, what makes it this list interesting also for using in technology, but particularly also when you are interested in seeing technology as part of STEM, then you can see that these concepts go beyond subject boundaries, because the concept of stability can be found in stability in physics, stability of an atom, for instance, chemistry, stability of reaction, but in biology also the stability in an ecosystem, and of course in technology as stability in construction, like in buildings that should keep standing. So one and the same concept, very generic, but applicable in all these different domains. And what helps us to integrate these domains also is by taking a design perspective, because when we want to learn concepts that have this overall overarching effect, then why not teach them in an overall way? And that is by design work, because design work includes technology as what designing, of course, is, let's say, professionally. That is what we do when we do technology, and engineering in also more sophisticated way, not just by doing it in more qualitative, but also in more quantitative ways. We use knowledge from science. So when we want to have a stable building, we also look at what does physics say about stability, and also we use mathematics. So this really helps integrate the different components of STEM in a much better way than just saying, okay, we do something about design, then all of a sudden we do an experiment that is somehow related to the same device, but then we go back to the design work and we don't even use the outcomes of the experiment. Now you really try to bring them together, to weave them together so that you really get one coherent activity. So I'm going to skip this for time reasons. So how can we learn concepts through design? Well, in the first place, design is a context. So if you think in terms of concept context, designing is certainly a context, because we, in reality, we do design work, and it requires often a combination of concepts. It allows for cognitive conflicts to occur. That is certainly a very attractive feature of doing design work. Example, if you want to teach I'll take a concept from physics this time, but let's say you want to teach about sinking and floating. The concepts of thinking and floating. What determines whether something sinks or floats? Well, there's misunderstandings about that. Some people think big things float. They think of a big oil tanker. Small things sink. They think of the little nail that you put on the water and bloop, there it goes. And if they build a boat based on that, they'll soon find out, in most cases, it will not float. So they're forced to think about what is wrong in my thinking? What is wrong in my understanding of what makes a device think, sink, or float? So this is what we call a cognitive conflict, and design situations are very nice, because if you have a wrong conception about something, the chance that your design will not work is very often high. So you will be forced to rethink your design. So how does that work? Well, this is really the way engineers work. And that makes design work very interesting, because you also get an understanding of this whole professional area of how engineers work. Because what you do is design a prototype based on what you know, including all your misconceptions, but also correct preconceptions, of course. Then make systematic changes in the design, just like people do that design aircraft. They put it in the wind tunnel, they see how it flies, and then they start making the wings a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, a little bit thicker, shift the point of gravity, the center of gravity, and see what happens with the flying behavior. By doing that, you get two results at the same time, because you learn a lot about aerodynamics, and at the same time, your aircraft gets better and better. And this is typically the way engineers work. So you design something, try out, investigate. So you weave together investigating and designing, so that you also learn from it. And that knowledge can also be, of course, technological knowledge, because you also get more understanding of what a system is when you start tampering with the parts. And so this always has a twofold outcome, which makes it very nice. And you can do that in a very simple way. So if you do it just with paper airplanes, you just make the pupils make paper airplanes, and they can make all these changes by themselves that the professional engineers do in wind tunnels. They can change the wingspan. They can change the center of gravity. Just use a paper clip that you put in, and you shift it from one place to another. So this is true engineers' work. And of course, they will never get Bernoulli's law out of that. But they'll get an understanding, a basic understanding of what makes things fly, what is of influence. And so this is a very simple way of doing it. Now, my final word, if we want to do these things, it is very important, of course, that teachers are well prepared for that. And here, of course, is a serious barrier, because it is difficult for teachers to work together if they have been educated in very different ways. So if you want to do this properly, of course, you need a physics teacher to tell you what, in fact, is influential, what might make a difference. You need a technology teacher in order to be able to help the pupils to design things and make things. And so you need different disciplines, and they all have had different educations, teacher educations. And so an average physics teacher doesn't know that much about designing. And I know by experience that a lot of technology teachers do not know a lot about physics, rather not because they think, oops, this is this difficult abstract discipline that I try to get away from as soon as possible. So this really requires that teachers need to have more than just their detailed subject knowledge. They also need, in the first place, to have a broader understanding of their concept, but they also need to be able to look beyond the boundary of their own subject and the basic understanding of the different way of thinking of the other disciplines. And also they need to also get this new way of thinking about concept learning, because maybe in the past they have always thought that it was a matter of telling the abstract concept and making pupils apply it. So they need to rethink the whole. Well, in European countries, we say didactics. The English always get a bit nervous about that because they prefer the word pedagogy, but let's say we're Danish among Dutch, so we're used to the word pedagogy. There are no Brits here that will tap us on the finger and say that's not the correct word, but you know what I mean, right? So it's more than just rigid methodologies. It's taking into account how pupils learn and how we can teach. And so teachers also need to take this inquiry-based approach, because if indeed you want to do research on your prototype, you want to make these changes and measure the effects, then you also explore reality. So you also need this inquiry-based. So this is also a way of combining design-based learning and inquiry-based learning. And hopefully that in the end will lead to a deeper understanding of these different concepts. And thus, and here we're back at the beginning, contribute to an understanding of how technology functions, how to be a citizen in this complex technological world with more than an understanding that a washing machine consists of this metal and those types of nuts and bolts, but really have a deeper understanding of what the thing is and does and how to deal with it properly. So that is what I wanted to say. This is my final slide that has no information at all, of course, other than that you can brush up your Dutch a bit, because then you can say how the Dutch word is spelled for technological university or University of Technology. Technisk Universiteit Delft, or whatever it is in Danish. That would have been in Swedish. Anyway, so let me stop sharing there. And so we have some time. I see Camilla's. Oh,